90% of dudes rapping, they ain't nice as me. 98% ain't live the same type of life as me. The judge gave me life and then they sent me with a life as be. That level 4 with depth and vice, the type of stuff they like to see. Two choices, fight or flee. I refuse to die a chump. I never been a mark, but damn, it's scary when that riot jump. I seen dudes cry, get pumped, and some sexually brutalized. Knew a dude who lost his life and he was only doing 5 year-long racial fights when homie all you do is ride. Lonely days and nights up in a hole causing suicide. From the moment you arrive, you see the Mexican mafia, AB skinheads with big giant swastikas, pro-black philosophers, the BGF, the Kumi, and Muslims who will murk you from the nation to the Sunni. That MS was loony, quick to ride up on they rival. Even Christians went to church, hide knives up in they Bible. Political and tribal, the Crips and Damus, the Long Beach, the Hubs and the Dubs and the Grooves, the IE, the Bakersfield, the Dago Pyrus, the hustlers quick to roll, the gangsters gon' move. Whatever click you choose, you better
Say what's cracking, YouTube? It's your boy 16 to Life, and I'm back like I'm on a parole violation. Yard down! Now, for those of y'all that's new to my page, in 1994, I got arrested. I was eventually sentenced to 16 years plus life, and I served 24 years straight in the California prison system. Now, let's hop right up into this story. So, you see the topic. Do lifers have to debrief? And I've heard people ask this question a lot. I've also heard people say that lifers, in order to get parole, they have to go to a SNY yard and things of that nature. So I'm going to bring some clarification on that today. Actually, I've heard people who have done a considerable amount of time who did not have life say the wrong thing too. So definitely some people are misinformed, and there's a misconception about that, right? So now when I say people who had life, I'm talking about people who were sentenced to life with the possibility of parole. When I first came to prison in 1996, my sentence was 16 years plus life. So basically for me, I had to do 16 years. At that time, I was eligible for half time when the sentencing laws was going on then. So actually, I had to do half of the 16, which was 8. Then I had to start doing a natural life sentence. And after, well, a natural life sentence back in those days, under the laws that I was sentenced under, was after you did 7 years, you was then eligible to start seeing the parole board. But my case is kind of different, right? Because you have a lot of people who are sentenced to 16 years to life, not 16 years plus life. So when you're sentenced to 16 to life or 25 to life, if you're sentenced to 25 to life, to my understanding is that you would have to do 24 years and then you would be eligible for parole. But like I said, keep in mind, any of those people who were sentenced to a life sentence with the possibility of parole, legally, they were eligible for parole. But what was going on was they were being systematically denied by the governor and the parole board. In California is one of the few states who, when you go to the parole board, and in California, only the lifers have to go to the parole board. I know other states, all people incarcerated in the prison system have to go to the parole board in order to obtain their freedom. But in California, only if you're sentenced to life. So in California is one of the rare states that those who are on the parole board, even though they are appointed by the governor, when they grant you parole, the governor can then look over it. He can rescind their decision basically and take away your finding of suitability. That's what they call it in California. When they find you, when they say that you can go home, as a lifer, they call it you've been found suitable. And so even though the parole board, who once again were appointed by the governor, when they say, okay, you know what? Yeah, man, we think chill. We think he can go home. The governor then has a certain period to when he can overlook it and review their decision and say, nah, I don't like how he answered this question. I don't like how he said right there. And he can reverse their decision. And essentially, you are a lifer again. Now, when you are found suitable in California, it's about a 6-month process, 180 days, sometimes 120, depending on if you were sentenced as a attempted murder, if you came in prison for attempted murder or kidnap, then you had to wait 120 days. If you came to jail for murder, then you had to wait 180 days. But like I said, that could be reversed by the governor. And so when I first came to prison, that was happening like 99.9% of the time. Now, every year you have thousands, because it's like 32, 33 male prisons in California. So every year you would have thousands and thousands upon dudes in different institutions go to their parole board hearings, and also the women who were sentenced to life as well. And they were all being denied. It was just a small percent. And I done a video. I think the name of that video is How I Got Life and How I Got Home. And in that video, I did the research and had the exact numbers right, but it was a extremely small percent of people who had life being found suitable and then actually allowed to go home. I think maybe in a span of maybe 14, 15 years, you may have had 9 or 10 people, right? And so the governors at that time, Pete Wilson, and I forget right now the governor behind it, but they basically came out and said no one in a California prison who's sentenced to life for murder will be going home. So what they had essentially done is they had changed your sentence from life with the possibility of parole to life without the possibility of parole, because they had the final say so in a person who was sentenced to life, right? And so fortunately and luckily for those serving life sentences in California, after a period of time of constantly being denied unfairly at the board, you had lifers who then filed lawsuits, and you had some of those lawsuits were ruled on in the favor of the lifer who filed them. It was a judge, I believe his last name was Klein, and he was known to be extremely fair in his rulings. And so, of course, if a lifer filed a ruling about possibly being denied for a specific reason, and that lawsuit was ruled in his favor, then that ruling also applied to all other lifers who was sentenced under similar conditions, right? And so basically that's what happened and got the ball rolling. One technique that the parole board would use is they would deny people who came before them with life sentences, saying the nature of his crime. Due to the nature of his crime, we are denying you parole. Even if he had been an ideal convict or prisoner or inmate and hadn't gotten into any trouble for 25 years, they would talk about the nature of the crime due to the crime that you committed back in 1985. At the age of 20, we're still not letting you out. And so that was a ruling that was profound, and they ruled that the crime is not going to change. So you can no longer continue to deny this person due to the nature of the crime, albeit that it may have been vicious and heinous. And so that was one trick that was no longer allowed to be used by the parole board. And then it was another ruling. It was another case that was ruled on that opened up the door, and I forget the exact case right now, but that opened up the floodgate for lifers, right? And so to answer your question, no, lifers do not have to debrief, do not have to go to the S&Y yard in order to obtain their freedom. I don't know where that rumor got started, right? But that's definitely true. Now, once these new decisions have been made and a new system was put in place, and throughout the system, of course, because convicts keep up with that type of thing. And then you have a lot of publications that was filtering news about parole into the prisons through, like I said, through publications that these convicts were allowed to order and read. And sometimes they would be present in law libraries. This started giving hope to those who were sentenced with life. Unfortunately, many convicts who had been down 25, 30 years on a 7 to life or 15 plus life, by that time they had became disenchanted with the parole board system, and they had given up. They had got in a lot of trouble that placed themselves in a negative light when they went in front of the parole board, because one of the criteria in order to get parole, you definitely have to be rule violation free for at least 5 years. And, that's a long, long time in prison when, every day is different. You're dealing with different personalities, different situation, things going on. And plus, it can always be spontaneous violence that breaks down, that breaks out, right? And then you have no choice sometimes but to respond, especially if it's racial. Sometimes when I do stories about prison, or other YouTube content creators who make stories about prison, sometimes when they do stories about prison, you'll have these dudes in the comments saying, hey man, why are you talking about that? You can get people in trouble, or so on and so forth, right? One thing I like to say, for as long as you have had convicts doing time, you have also had the administration there in prison somewhat doing time as well, because they're there on a day-to-day basis, as well as the convicts. The only difference is they get to go home. So they know about all the makings and the going on in prison. And if you tell a story about somebody getting slapped or stabbed in 1992, best believe they're not just to go back and dig that case up and try to prosecute that guy. First and foremost, the statute of limitations has ran out. And like I said, there are 32 male prisons in the state of California. Most of these prisons have at least 4 yards. So it's just too much going on every day for them to worry about something that happened in 1992. But so basically, though, like I said, the administration has been doing time with the convicts. So they know the makings, the in and outs of prison. So it's very little that any YouTube content creator can come on here and say that they don't know about. They may not know of who is selling drugs, but they definitely know drugs is being sold, knives are being made, so on and so forth, right? And so and I say all that to say that, so say when a race riot jumps off in any particular prison anywhere, let's just say, of course, by me being black, if a race riot jumps off and I throw my hands up in the middle of the race riot and say, hey, I'm not participating, I got a parole date, I'm trying to go home, or whatever, or I have a parole hearing coming up in 2 months, whoever is involved in that racial riot, the other race, they don't care about that stuff. If they're gonna run up on me and do what they do, right? So I pretty much have no choice but to participate, if at least to defend myself and try to keep myself from being hurt. The administration, they know this, but you may have a particular guard who sees me, fighting, trying to defend myself, and he'll write me up for participating in a riot. So of course I'll go to the hearing, and of course I will be found guilty, when actually I wasn't participating in the riot. I'm trying to stop my motherfucking life from being took. I'm not participating in a riot, you dildo. I'm trying to stop from being killed in this motherfucker. But the administration, they don't want to hear that, right? And so they'll ask you these questions, of course, at the parole board, to make it seem like I still have a gang member's mentality because I'm participating in this riot, when no, that's not what I'm doing. If I'm out in the yard and a riot breaks out, like I said, once again, I don't have a choice. So it was a lot of these unfair happenings in prison that the parole board would use to systematically deny people that they just didn't want out. And once again, like I said, they was essentially changing your sentence from life with the possibility of parole to life without the possibility of parole. But then again, once these new court rulings came down, you had these groups basically championing the efforts of the convicts, and a lot of these things started being changed. The parole board system got revamped. New policies were put in place that made it easier for a person with life to obtain his freedom. And so back then, too, it was unheard of for a person to go to his parole board hearing, his very first parole board hearing, and be found suitable had he fit the proper criteria to do so. Now, in this day and age, you have many people who will go to the parole board for their first time and be found suitable. Now, one thing that the board likes to see, they do like to see convicts on lower levels, level 3, level 2, and now even lifers are allowed to go to level 1. When I first came to prison in 96, lifers were not allowed to go to any yard lower than a level 2. And so for those of you guys who are not familiar with the California prison system, the way it works is it's based on a point system in terms of what yard you will be placed on. So if you stay out of trouble, so when you first get locked up, right? Like when I got locked up in 96 and I went to my initial I went to my initial classification, in reception when I get to the first pen, when they analyze you and they're trying to figure out where you're going to go. It was certain type of things that determined, along with your crime, how many points you would get. The more points you had, of course, the more higher level security prison they felt that you needed. So if you didn't graduate from high school, that was more points because they felt that you was less educated. If you had a vicious crime, you got more points. If you didn't have children, you got more points because they felt that, you had less to care about. So just like if you did have children, they would deduct points. They would, if you had a high school diploma, they would deduct points. If you had been to the military, they would deduct points. And then, so whatever your point score was eventually determined on what type of institution that you was going to be at. I believe that from 0 to 22 or 18, you was a level 1. From 19 to 25 or whatever, you was on a level 2, just so on and so forth, to give you guys an example. So once you're in prison, you're working and you stay out of trouble, 8 points will be deducted for each year that you worked or you took some type of trade and you remain disciplinary free, right? And so so the board does like to see an individual on a lower level security institution, because it shows that he has been staying out of trouble. But there were times when I did hear of people who on level 4s were found suitable and sent home. And see, another thing about being on a level 4 is there are very few, if any, or at least when I was locked up, self-help groups on these higher levels. It's so much stuff going on that, in order to get some of these self-help chronos that the board loves to see in our file, you need to, if you're a lifer and you're trying to obtain your freedom, you need to be trying to work your way down to a level 3, a level 2, in order to be able to participate in these groups, on a regular basis. Because sometimes, especially when I was locked up on those level 4s back in those days, a lockdown sometimes can last maybe 3 months, 6 months, sometimes a year or two, depending on the nature of the lockdown, right? And so in order to participate in these things continuously, it's better to be on a lower level yard, where you have more people who have the mindset of they are trying to go home, and they are less likely to turn things into a big situation. The mentality of a lot of people on the 4-yard is, I'm not going home, or it's so many dangerous people up here that in order to maintain my reputation, and in order to maintain sometimes being unchallenged or unmolested, I have to carry myself in a certain situation and respond in a certain way when I encounter certain type of situations, right? So like I said, due to just being on the yard, seeing people suddenly, dudes who you knew of, like, man, that dude, he got a date. And that was the attitude by a lot of lifers. Man, they just gave JoJo a date. Man, JoJo stabbed somebody back in 95, But now JoJo had stayed out of trouble the last 8-9 years. He had been going to these help classes. And so now he had changed who he was, right? And basically that's what the board wants to know. Do you realize who you was at the time of your commitment offense, and who are you today? So briefly, to break it down for you guys, a person could go in there and say, look, when I got convicted of this crime, I was inconsiderate, I was selfish, I was a gang member, I didn't have respect for others, I didn't have respect for the community. Today, now, I'm a more mature, intellectual, grown man. I'm a free thinker. I'm no longer involved in gangs. I love and care for other people, and I'm concerned about the safety of others. And that, in a nutshell, is partially how you would gain your freedom. Of course, they would want you to talk about your crime to a certain degree. Some people would just go in there and they would just say that I admit to whatever is on the record, without discussing their crime. Because when you get convicted of a crime, you're going to have an appeal. The circumstances of your crime is going to be in that appeal. Once that appeal is heard by the highest court in California, whatever that the opinion of that court is pretty much what the parole board is going with. You can go in there and say, well, okay, no, I wasn't in a white Camaro, I was in an IROC. You can make certain little corrections or clarifications about your case if you want to. I didn't have a 9mm, it was a 45. But for the most part, they're going to believe the meat and potatoes of that case. So trying to go in there and argue about your case, it's not a retrial, right? You going there to try to obtain your freedom. And unfortunately, a lot of convicts make the mistake of trying to go in there and talk about what happened and what they didn't do and stuff like that. No, I didn't shoot him, I stabbed him. Just stuff like that is going to get you denied. But so a lot of people will just go in there and say, I admit to whatever they have in the record is true, without, that way they don't have to go in deep into their case and things of that nature, right? But the board basically in this day and age, they want you to basically just take responsibility for the things that you've done, and basically explain to them now, and if a situation was to arise, how would you handle that situation today? And so for anybody that's remained on the mainline general population, because that's all I can speak of, no, you do not have to go in there and debrief. You do not have to go in there and talk about other people, other organizations, this and that. Now, the board may ask you, have you committed any other crimes? Did you commit any other crimes before you was caught? Now, only an idiot, especially if he was a gang member, would go in there and say, no, never. This was my first crime. So you can say things like, well, yes, I was involved in drug dealing. I had assaulted people. I've done things that gang members can do, because the board, like I said, once again, they have on the board, you have former prison guards, you have wardens, police officers, former DAs. So for the most part, they know the criminal system well. They know that, the average gang member doesn't get caught for his first crime. So if you go in there lying and talking too, let's say, you trying to paint yourself in too good of a light, then more than likely you're gonna be denied, because they're gonna feel you're being dishonest. Me myself, I told them, yeah, I've sold drugs before. I've done things that gang members do. You don't have to talk about any case specifically. And then I look at it like this, right? You have done, or in my situation, I've done 24 years. I've been in here a long time. So, to try to go in here and just deny and pretend that I was an angel, what sense would that do me? I have seen dudes who go in there. I knew one particular dude, they asked him, he had a crimey, and they asked him, hey man, something about his crimey. This dude said, hey man, why don't you all go ask him? He over there on that other yard. And of course they denied him, because they feel you're still holding on to a gang mentality. So, you have to know how to tiptoe between, what should be said and what shouldn't be said. You can definitely go in there. You don't have to tell on anybody. You don't have to snitch on anybody or anything or any organization and obtain your freedom. And nowadays, and even when I was in prison, now, like I said, the system has been reversed, and the ideas of a person being able to obtain his freedom by the parole board has changed drastically. Nowadays, they are pretty much walking dudes through their parole hearing. Briefly before I go, like I told you guys, I had 3 attempted murders and a murder. The second time I went to my parole board hearing, because for the first 3 times I waived it, and I stipulated that I wasn't ready due to violence and stuff that I was getting, that I was getting into while I was in there. And the reason why I stipulated is because back then, at that time, they could deny, once you came before the board, they had voted some new laws in place where they could deny a person at a hearing. They could deny you for coming back to your hearing. It could be 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, or even 15 years. So let's just imagine a person doing 22, 23 years, and they tell you, okay, you know what, man, come back in 7 years. That's like a whole nother sentence, right? So I said all that to say, when I was finally found suitable at my second parole hearing in 2018, this was the second time that I had physically went in front of the board, and I actually was eligible for my parole hearing in 2010 had I not been postponing and things of that nature. On my second parole hearing, they pretty much had their minds already made up that they was going to give me a date, right? And I had heard people say that, and that's something that initially I did not believe. But then, as I told you guys, I would pretty much religiously study those. I believe it was a publication called the CLN, the California Lifers News, And basically, those are publications that pertain to new information that was very helpful, whether it was lawsuits or just whatever a lifer needed to do to get his parole. I had seen where a lifer had raised an appeal because he had got denied in front of the parole board. And the now when you go in front of the parole board, there's going to be a commissioner and a deputy commissioner, a DA, and your attorney. And basically, the commissioner had said on record, well, today, Mr. Whoever he was talking to, I had planned on giving you a date today when we came in here. But then I guess due to some line of questioning that or due to some answers that the convict took to a certain line of questioning that the deputy commissioner had, he ended up denying him about something that was old that had happened a long time ago. So pretty much a lot of times the commissioner and the deputy commissioner's minds are already made up on what way they're leaning in terms of giving an individual a date before he even comes before them, due to the previous transcripts that they have read at his previous board hearings, right? And so this was my second hearing, right? And so like I told you guys before, I was charged with 3 attempted murders and a separate murder. So when the commissioner got around to asking me about the murder, I basically said I saw an individual walking down the street who was testifying against me in another court proceeding. I jumped out the car, I ran up on him, and I shot him. And pretty much verbatim, the commissioner's exact words were, that's not good. And then he automatically moved on to the next topic, next question. He didn't ask me any more about that murder. Also, I think it's extremely important for me to mention this, especially for those who are ignorant of the law. My crimes took place in 1993 and 1994. So what I'm discussing in front of a board hearing is not a court proceeding. I've already been found guilty. All my appeals have been exhausted. So whatever has already been submitted on record as far as my trial, my court hearings, my appeals, so on and so forth, that is what the commissioners on the parole board is going with. So nothing I say at this point in terms of the case can help or hurt me at this time. I've already been convicted and found guilty. He and the deputy commissioner spent more time questioning me and asking me about a write-up that I had got maybe about 16 months ago for disrespecting staff. They questioned me about that write-up at least 15 or 20 minutes. And it was due to that line of questioning that I actually believed that I was not going to be found suitable. Basically, staff had said that I had disrespected her. So in the end, when he gives his rulings, he said something along the lines of, while my response may have been what could be seen as disrespect, it basically didn't mean that I was a threat to society and something that would prevent me from being found suitable that day. And so, fortunately for me, I was found suitable. So in my particular case, he never presented me with any line of questioning that would be like debriefing or informing on another group or another organization. But me personally, myself, I always maintained to be a non-affiliate anyway. I don't see why an individual would get arrested for a crime and say I'm a gang member, because of course, that's only going to compound matters and make matters worse. This dude has shot and killed somebody, and he also is claiming to be a member of a gang on top of that. So like I said, for me, I don't see why individuals do that, but to each his own. Anyway, you already know what it is. It's your boy 16 to life. Resume normal program.